1,000 years of longing. Dameron Nearwarder sipped gingerly at their drink. The room was abuzz with anticipation, electric with excitement. Even the Otkadov contingent, 4 severe older orcs in midnight blue robes engaged in a deep conversation with a pair of magisters, seemed to have caught it. The other Navarre were everywhere, smiling, chatting, laughing. For the last half hour, Dameron had been watching with detached interest as an affable Naga cleverly steered visitors around the room, introducing them to strangers and then slipping away to do it all over again with another guest and another academic. It was heartening to see the great dance being practiced so beautifully. For their part, Dameron was finding it tricky to achieve the level of enthusiasm shared by their colleagues and couldn't work out why. They felt outside it all, as if they were watching a terrible disaster unfold. Putting their empty mug down, they drifted across to Ibanus and Hunacia. They were stood in a little zone of stillness, examining what everyone had started, jokingly at first, calling the War Table. A map of the Empire, the Malum, and Axos, scrawled across a dozen sheets of parchment, with strands of coloured thread marking the health of the Trods, green for healthy, red for severed, blue for future theoretical. They shifted slightly to let Dameron slip between them, and the three stood shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the table. "It's pretty inevitable, I think," said Ibanus quietly, his voice barely audible over the excited buzz of conversation. He was continuing a thought from earlier, as was his wont, assuming everyone else would remember and join the two sentences together. "The Trods, you mean?" Hunacia Riverstep seemed sceptical. "I suppose so, but we won't live to see it." "Our great-grandchildren won't live to see it," said Dameron sadly. "And I don't think it's anywhere near as inevitable as you seem to believe. The Trods are powerful, but they're fragile. Like empires." Ibanus meant it as a joke, but it fell flat between the three Navarre scholars. They continued to stare at the map as the celebration ebbed and flowed around them. The Naga woman from earlier was introducing one of the heralds of Phaleron to a League librarian, and a severe-looking Vate who was in the middle of a long but apparently funny story about someone who ordered their books by the colour of the spine. "Can you imagine," said Hunacia with a grim chuckle, "what the Senate is going to say? Never mind what the military council is going to say." As usual, Ibanus treated the rhetorical question as if it were seriously meant, and considered it thoughtfully for several moments. "They will almost certainly say that the time is not right, maybe later, once we have dealt with the Druge and the Grendel, I think, based on previous events." Dameron was only half listening. Their attention had been caught by the bowl of Phaleron across the great map from their little trio. The cauldron was older than the Empire. The ancient table had been used by generations of scholars and magicians when Taruniel still ruled these lands. They gently traced one of the curling designs along the edge of the carefully varnished weirwood. For a moment he fancied he could feel every second of the years that had passed since the table was built. "It could end within our lifetimes," Dameron spoke quietly, haltingly. "Our great-grandchildren would know it only as a story. One day an end. What if that day was this day? Against that, who could stand against the promise of that?" They could finally feel it, the frisson in the room, that powerful energy begin to well up in them, that electricity that had been so lacking, that excitement for the road ahead. After 1,000 years of walking, after so many generations of death and pain and shame, after everything that has been sacrificed, we could be the people who finally destroy the Valorn. Overview. A year ago, the Navarre took the fateful decision to expand the great library of Hakinian, so that it would be vast enough to hold the treasure trove of documents and records about the Valorn scattered through every striding and steading in the Empire, as well as contributions from allies familiar and unexpected. The hope was that if the Empire compiled everything they knew on the subject, bringing it all together at last, then perhaps the answer to the Valorn might emerge. A way at last to destroy the ancient evil and end 1,000 years of longing. In the end, many of the scholars are surprised how little genuinely new information is revealed by this great process. The seminal text On the Nature of the Valorn by Shan Eternal has already accomplished the bulk of this work, compiling almost everything that was known about the history of Turuniel and the Valorn into one authoritative text. A lot of time was spent validating and confirming everything that was published, and adding what new information that was found into that picture. What the research has achieved is to clearly highlight the answers that existed in Shan's text, and to show that the Navarre possess everything there is to know on this subject. Of course, there will always be the temptation to seek further information, but the scholars who have spent a year studying this for the Navarre are certain that this report represents everything of substance that there is to know about what happened and what can be done about it. Wisdom knows all knowledge is incomplete, but the virtuous apply what they have learned. A gathering of scholars. The collection at the Great Library of Hakinian is as close to complete as it can be. More lore will be added in years to come, certainly, but right now it seems that a copy of everything ever written about the Valorn, a record of every story and song, is gathered under its roof. Scholars from the League and High Guard, even the threat of cold sun in Hakinia did nothing to slow their work. Particular note is made of the 4 advisors on the Valorn who helped build towards this monumental stage. Merrill Pathfinder, who laid the foundations, Neb Firstdance, who built on them and helped establish the tradition of sharing what was learned with others, Shan Eternal, who recovered the library at Hakinian and whose book arguably began the task of gathering knowledge in one place that culminated in this grand project, and Nathia Autumngale, who helped bring matters to their current state with the expansion of the library and the unprecedented push into Brokeliand. None of that praise is intended to diminish the role played by generations of Navari and other imperial citizens in gathering this information, protecting it, preserving it, adding to it over the centuries with their own encounters with the Valorn and its spawn. If the researchers gathered at the Great Library of Hakinian have seen further, it is because they have climbed the trees watered by so much blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Of particular aid are the scholars of the League, who contributed stores of documents gathered from the universities of 4 cities, along with their own keen minds and their understanding of organising and operating a large centre of learning. The pilgrims of Highguard brought books and scrolls from repositories of learning across their nation, including priceless first-person accounts of the Valorn recorded in journals stretching back to the years following landfall, and helped scour the Empire for more sources of knowledge. The Department of Historical Research, overstretched as usual, offered as much aid as it could afford, delivering centuries of collected documents to the library. In addition to the books gathered from mundane sources, the Eternal Phaleron, who serves as a patron of the Great Library, offered access to copies of every book in its collection relating to the Valorn. The price was steep, but gladly paid. The day after the autumn equinox, an entire wing's worth of books were added to the library. Many were copies of texts already in place, but there were also a few priceless, unique tomes that could be found nowhere else in the Empire. Heralds of the Celestial Library remained behind to ensure the books were properly shelved, and their aid in reorganising parts of the archive for optimal use was a marvel of library science. To all this was added papers seized from the heirs of Turuniel's stronghold deep in Brokeliand. These give a very different view of the Valorn to that traditionally taken by scholars who have not cracked their minds by seeking communion with the Valorn. For all their blatant madness, the heirs of Turuniel have been closer to the Valorn hearts than any civilized Navarre have managed in centuries, and their insight provides a fascinating alternative understanding unencumbered by centuries of precedence and preconception. Then, following the autumn equinox, a contingent of orc warlocks from Otkadov joined the faculty at the Great Library as guests of the advisor on the Valorn, bringing with them scrolls containing information never before seen by human eyes, winnowed from the archives of the Thule, supported by the peculiar insight of the dragons and their rarefied understanding of arcane arts. It's been a massive undertaking, and now it's complete. A way to destroy the Valorn has been found. What was? The oldest records stored at the Great Library describe Taruniel before the coming of the Valorn, helping to explain why they did what they did and what went wrong. Creation and destruction. The original Valorn ritual performed by the Taruniel was designed to create a great reservoir of spring magic, a deep well that would hold power from the spring realm and be constantly refilled from it. The Taruniel had experience with such magics, having used them successfully to warm the city of Emrys, in present-day Skuld. Their cities were facing attacks on all fronts from hostile powers, for the most part orcs. They believed they were steadily losing the war against their enemies, and the ritual was their only chance to turn the tide and ensure their survival. They planned to channel spring magic from the wells into their armies, providing a near-limitless source of strength and healing. Those who have fought the Valonspawn can testify to the supernatural vitality of its creation. It is fascinating to imagine what an imperial army might achieve if granted that kind of power. The Taruniel magicians had poor relations with the Eternals of the Spring Realm, so rather than bargain with them, they sought to fill their reservoirs with power drawn directly from the primal forest itself, rather than any intermediary. Although the Taruniel possessed a lot of mana crystals, they had nothing like the sophistication and complexity of imperial lore. They appear to have had few or no effective ways for magicians from different cities to cooperate, nor anything like the Imperial Regio. That limited the remit of their magic. The law of dominion enabled each city to perform magic on the city and the lands around it, but not across their empire as a whole. Thus each city performed their own version of the ritual. To make the ritual possible, they made extensive use of Talonvine infusion to boost their ritual abilities, using ilium taken from the Urizen. There have been several suggestions over the years that the rituals were made permanent with ilium as an explanation for why the Valorn has persisted for a millennium, but that can't be true because of the unfeasible amounts of ilium involved. It is more likely that this longevity of the magic is caused by the presence of the plants and animals in the area. In effect, the Valorn's presence in an area is powerful enough that it alters the landscape in such a way that it anchors the magic in place. This would explain why it is possible to remove the Valorn energies from an area by destroying the infested creatures. In effect, the Valorn is like some great spring regio spreading over the forests of the Empire. Even that was not sufficient for them to cast such high-magnitude rituals. To attain the power they needed required powerful coven stones that would boost the spring magic of everyone linked to them. They obtained these stones, these fulcrums of power, from Feni living in what is today the Marches, or more precisely, from a god of the Feni, whom the Taruniel had captured and enslaved. They refer to this creature as a silent sound of fearful melancholia, which could be an exotic Feni name for an eternal or herald of some kind. There were arguments over whether to use the ritual stones it created or not. There was some suggestion that the god may have deliberately corrupted the stones in some way as an act of revenge. Spring magic is inherently difficult to control, but the rituals themselves were successful. The disaster appears to have begun when they attempted to use a subsequent ritual, possibly the Dance of Navarran Thorn or a ritual very like it, to connect the wells together. Their aim was to channel the magical spring energies into their armies, giving them enormous vitality and energy wherever they fought. At the point where the hearts were linked and the Tarunial armies began to draw on their power, the Valorn awoke. The Spring Realm violently breached the walls of the wells they had created, spilling out to infest living things in the area. When they realised what had gone wrong, the magicians destroyed the links joining the hearts together, but by then it was too late. The cities did not fall immediately. They tried to fight off the encroaching plants, monstrous insects and savage beasts, but all efforts to defend them were hopeless, and they were systematically overwhelmed. The Taruniel were forced to abandon their cities. Only those who fled survived. The rest were consumed by the madness and horror that became the Valorn. It is likely that the hubris of the Taruniel played a major part in their fall. Their magicians appear to have ignored the crucial resonances of spring magic that can be overwhelming with very powerful magic. They assumed they could overcome the tendency of spring magic to change and evolve, to destroy, to run riot. The great rituals that they cast did only what the Taruniel had foreseen, but they assumed they could then link up the hearts without amplifying the resonances of spring magic. That was the crucial failure that caused the spring magic to run amok. After the fall. The Taruniel armies made several forlorn attempts to reclaim their cities from the Valorn, which only reinforced the hopelessness of their position. Caught between the destruction of their cities, the explosion of hostile life that spilled out of the wells of spring magic, and the attacking orcs, their forces collapsed as quickly as their civilization. Navarre and Thorn rose to prominence among those who endured the aftermath of the fall. They led some of the larger attacks on the Valorn hearts in Brokeliand and Biantol Dol, which were thrown back at great cost. After several heroic failures, the remaining Taruniel were forced to accept that they would never defeat the forces of the Valorn while they could draw on the revitalizing power of the Spring Realm that suffused the areas the Valorn dominated. Thus, they turned to a magical solution, inventing the ritual known today as the Dance of Navarre and Thorn. The ritual taps into the wells of power, drawing some of that energy away and weakening the Valorn in the process, an essential precursor to any attempt to retake an area by force. Whether this ritual was the same ritual the Taruniel originally used to link the Valorn or just similar is now impossible to tell. Clearly, the name of the ritual was changed if it was the same or similar. For the best part of 2 decades or more, Navarre and Thorn led efforts to defeat the Valorn by building up their forces to the point where they could create and sustain substantial Trod networks. However, they eventually realised that the approach had an essential flaw. The nature of the Valorn is such that it heals any harm it experiences impossibly quickly. The ritual that had been created was a way to wound the Valorn, to make it bleed. It would work, but once the wound became deep enough to become significant, then the spring magic that sustains the Valorn would cause the wound to scab over and heal, stemming the flow of magic. To overcome this flaw, Navarre, Thorn and their allies led a desperate expedition right into the heart of the Valorn. They planned to create a weakness in the Valorn, in the heart of the first and most potent Valorn, the Valorn of Taruniel itself. They and those who went with them never returned from this expedition, but the stories of those who made it through to the heart of the Valorn during the adventure in Brokeliand last year have been carefully analysed and assessed. It seems that in some fashion Navarre and Thorn may still be alive in the heart of the Valorn there, like a spigot rammed into a Hercynian maple tree to allow syrup to flow. Their sacrifice prevents the Valorn from healing, allowing the Trods to continuously bleed its power. One thing is certain. They can only still be alive due to the power of the Valorn that is flowing through them. When the Valorn is destroyed, they will die. After so long, there is no way they will be able to survive without it. There is some awed speculation about what it must be like for them, alive for 1,000 years at the heart of horror. There is a great deal of discussion about whether there might be any way to save them, but it seems absolutely clear that the act of saving them will kill them. Navarre and Thorn made their choice centuries ago. All that can be done to honour that sacrifice now is to find a way to give them their final rest by defeating the Valorn. Their sacrifice created a way for the descendants of the Terunial to weaken the Valorn. By employing the dance of Navarre and Thorn, they could create the Trods, the network of paths that spiral away from the ruined cities. By walking the Trods, they reinforced them, and in drawing on the spring energy to speed their travel, they slowly but surely sapped the life of the Valorn. Simply creating Trods is not sufficient. They must be constantly powered and strengthened by the peregrinations of Navarre's stridings. What is? As well as the ancient history of the creation of the Valorn, the Great Library at Hakinian has compiled everything that has been discovered since the fall of Teruniel, and everything that is known now about the Valorn. The longest trod. It has been 1,000 years or so since the Valorn was created and the first Trods walked. In that time, the Valorn has been beaten back slowly but surely. Every step has been painful, but the dance of Navarre and Thorn and the dedication of the Navarre has slowly achieved the impossible. Drawing off the spring energy stored in the ruined cities steadily weakens the Valorn until eventually it becomes possible to reclaim an area from the enemy. However, a monstrous enemy like the Valorn does not simply go quietly into the night. While there is no evidence that it is sapient, there is no doubt at all that it is sensate. Somehow it can perceive what is happening around it. When it is attacked, it draws spawn to defend itself like bees around a hive. It senses when it is becoming weak enough to be vulnerable. When that happens, the Valorn changes. It becomes animated, lashing out violently, spasmodically, swarms of spawn emerging from the deep woods to attack the land about. It also becomes more intelligent, or at the least it seems like the spawn it creates possess more cunning and wits, the more threatened the Valorn feels. When roused in this way, the Valorn fights against destruction with the frenzy of a trapped beast. The Empire saw something of this during the fight to clear the Valorn from West Ranging. They also saw the potential benefit of doing so in the way the heirs of Teruniel attempt to rouse the Valorn of Brokeliand also left part of it vulnerable. Records of the cleansing of Miaran support this. When the heart was exposed, the Valorn struck outwards. It flailed and fought, and it took a great many Imperial soldiers to hold it back, to absorb its fury and cut the heart out of the territory. Once it was gone, there was still decades of work tearing up the last vestiges of the transformed and spring-infused plants and animals left, before the territory was anything like it is today. It's no coincidence that Miaran is so lightly forested, or that regions where the Valorn have been removed have significantly fewer trees in them than might be expected. This is both a blessing and a curse. As the Valorn strikes out blindly trying to cut the tethers that weaken it, it becomes much more vulnerable. It is dangerous to attack the Valorn at any time, but it is certain death to do so in its stronghold where it can draw on the healing power of the Spring Realm directly. But once it emerges from that cocoon, it becomes a terrible but fundamentally mortal threat. If it can be overcome on the field of battle, then it can be defeated, as any normal enemy might be. If that happens, then the Valorn pulls back, contracting in on itself, retreating to a smaller area to conserve its remaining energies. However, if the Valorn wins, then it will try to spread its pernicious influence over the land, breaking the Trods as it does so. Dying back in this way makes the Valorn harder to defeat in future. As long as the original rituals endure, the heart of each Valorn is continuously refreshed with revitalizing energy drawn from the primal forest. The magic is concentrated into an ever smaller area, as are the spawn it creates and sustains. Each time the Valorn gives ground, it becomes harder to bleed it further. The only way to counter this effect is for more people to walk the trods and for the Navarre to spread them further and further. The longer the journeys the Stridings undertake before they return to the heart, the greater the effect they have. All that remains. 1,000 years of toil have brought the Navarre to where they stand now. There is only one Valorn region left in Liathaven, one in Herkinia and 2 in Theranin. Brokeliand is the real threat with 5 regions. Skuld is constrained and weakened, Sarengrave is contained, but there is no real glimpse of how powerful it might be. Visakumo is an immense, ancient Valorn that has never been weakened, and today is even larger than Brokeliand. But as one highborn academic calmly points out, it is a very long way away in Axos. The Trods are doing their work, but the process is getting slower as the Valorn gets smaller, not faster. The heart of each Valorn is like an open wound in creation, allowing immeasurable amounts of spring magic to pour into the world. Outside of Miaran, those conduits have never closed, not in 1,000 years. The magic sustains the Valorn hearts in a state of practical immortality. It can be slowly drawn away by the Trods, and when enough of it is spread out and dissipated, the Valorn rouses itself and strikes back, making it possible to root it out of a region. But as previously mentioned, as the Valorn gets smaller, it gets more dangerous. The same amount of spring magic is focused in a smaller area, making it that much harder to destroy. In 1,000 years, the Navarre have defeated only 1 Valorn heart, and 7 more remain. It has seemed in recent times as if the process is speeding up, with both West Ranging and Dark Ranging becoming vulnerable in the same decade. But this is a result of the increased reach of the Trods and the dramatic increase in the number of people travelling them. Before that, it had been decades since any part of the Valorn became vulnerable. The Highborn paid a dramatic price to encourage their grey pilgrims to follow the Navarre onto the Trods. There doesn't seem to be the will in other nations for such a sacrifice. There is also a limit to how effective the Trods can be. It would help if they were extended to new territories, but even that can only achieve so much. Disruptions to the Trod network make the problem worse. Whenever a Valorn is cut off from the Trods, it rapidly recovers its depleted strength. The invigoration of the spring magic that constantly flows into it undoes each season the work of years of Trod walking. This has significant implications for Liathaven and Herkinia in particular, whose Trods have been recently disrupted. It's hard to apply any mathematics to the Valorn. It is a thing of chaos after all. But the magicians who have studied the problem estimate that at the current rate it will take at least 50 years before another Valorn heart, likely Herkinia, becomes vulnerable. There would likely be opportunities to reclaim a region or 2 of the Valorn before then, but even that won't happen for a decade now. A further century or so beyond Herkinia, Liathaven might be reclaimed. Beyond that, the projections become pure speculation. But the gloomiest predictions suggest that the Valorn might outlast the Empire. The overwhelming evidence is that the Valorn can only be torn out by the roots. It can be weakened and contained, made quiescent, but paradoxically that could actually make the situation worse in the long term, because it allows the Valorn to bank more of its energy. The Wither the Seed ritual is doing its job, but once it runs its course, Liathaven and Brokeliand and Skuld will return to full force almost immediately. What could be? The results of the work by the Herkinian scholars have identified 3 possible ways this might end, all unpalatable in one way or another. One requires extraordinary patience, one requires extraordinary sacrifice, and the last requires extraordinary courage. The Endless Trod. In the end, assuming nothing went wrong, that the Navarre and their Grey Pilgrim allies continued to walk the trods, and that groups like the heirs of Taruniel were prevented from doing anything precipitous, then the Navarre will eventually win. Eventually, just walking the trods, expanding their reach and encouraging people to join them will weaken the Valorns enough that they can be destroyed. All the projections, all the maths, show that that will take a very long time indeed. It's a matter of centuries, not years or decades. As one scholar notes, on those scales, the biggest problem would be to ensure the survival of the Empire long enough to finish the job. There is nothing new here. This is the approach that the Navarre have pursued for a millennium. It has worked, and it will continue to work, but the timescales involved are intimidating. Navarre and Thorn sacrificed themselves. Their souls have been trapped in the heart of the Valorn for 1,000 years. Must they now suffer for 1,000 more? The Trod Less Travelled. There is a brief theoretical discussion of another way this could end. The more the Valorn is cut back, the denser and more potent it becomes. Logically, therefore, if the Valorn were to spread, then its power would extend over a greater area, but it would be diminished in impact. In theory, if that happened, then it might be possible for people to forge a life within the Valorn. There would have to be certain sacrifices made, of course. There is no chance of the cities of the League surviving, or indeed any other Imperial architecture. The carefully tended fields of the Marches would likewise be swallowed up and consigned to history. But in theory, people could potentially survive. This is the future described in glowing terms in the documents recovered from the heirs of Taruniel's stronghold in Brokeliand. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. Quite apart from the fact that the Empire in its current form could not survive the Valorn, it would mean abandoning everything the Navarre have worked to achieve for 1,000 years, betraying the sacred trust handed down to them by Navarre and Thorn. But at least it gives some insight into the true goals of individuals like Drustan and the other heirs of Taruniel. It's even possible that something like this is what the magicians who performed the original rituals to create the Valorn envisaged. If either of those is true, then knowing that such a thing is possible may help the Empire understand the enemy better, the easier to defeat them. The final Trod. When the Valorn is roused, it becomes more dangerous, but more vulnerable. It can be roused to life with spring magic, but that is very dangerous. The Valorn is invigorated by the magic used to rouse it to life, and that causes it to expand from a position of strength, not weakness. The heirs of Taruniel have deliberately roused the Valorn on occasion in recent years, and there is fragmentary evidence that the Druge are researching magic that might do likewise. In neither case does anyone imagine that it is done for the Empire's benefit. However, the Dance of Navarre and Thorn presents a way the Valorn might be defeated in our lifetimes, if the Empire has the stomach for the battle. As each Valorn heart is connected to the network of Trods, the strain on the primal forest grows. If every Valorn heart were connected to the network simultaneously, the Valorn would respond as it does whenever it is threatened, becoming animated and lashing out. It would become vulnerable, but instead of one region, one small part of the Valorn responding, every region of the Valorn would feel the threat. Every region would become vulnerable. Every region would lash out. There is clear evidence that this was Navarre's plan from the beginning. Despite this, connecting all the Valorn with Trods has never been done before, at least not since the fall itself. Arguably, what is ambitious now would have been entirely impossible even 50 years ago. Currently, only 2 Valorn cannot be connected to the Trod network, Sarangrave and Visakumo in Axos. If they are connected together, the final stage of the Valorn will begin. It will wake properly, wake fully. It will become a single immense organism, similar in some ways to the Great Forest Orc's conception of the Great Forest. The researchers believe it will become conscious, and its spawn will become significantly more dangerous. There are already some signs of this. For example, there are signs that the Ettercaps have become much more cunning, adopting tool use and showing signs of being able to plan and prepare that go beyond anything an animal can achieve. Once awake, it will lash out. It will seek to join itself together in space rather than just by magic. Valorn spawn will push outwards from the Valorn hearts to try to reinfest their territories, and then expand outwards along the Trods, seeking to create a single immense Valorn covering all of what is now the Empire, the Malum, and Axos. Such an outcome might suit the heirs of Turunial, but if it was successful, it would be an apocalyptic event for the Empire. But, as soon as the Trod network is complete, the Valorn will become vulnerable. The endless flow of spring magic will be pulled out and spread across an immense area. While it is quiescent, the magic pools. The more active the Valorn becomes, the more it draws on the energy that infuses it for purposes other than healing and preserving itself. The Valorn would, to paraphrase an excited Navarre scholar, finally be a fight we could win. A League academician uses the analogy of a force in an impenetrable fortress. While they remain behind their walls, they cannot be fought. Once they emerge, they become vulnerable, but they are also able to stab you in the face. Defeating the Valorn. It's proving impossible to predict exactly how powerful the Valorn would be if it was roused, but the general excited consensus is that the slow work of draining its power over the last 10 centuries would mean that the Empire would have a hard fight, but could ultimately win if they were able to fully commit to that fight. Of course, none of these people are generals. The only information they have available to them is the size of the Empire's armies and the strength of the Valorn. A large, ancient Valorn like that in Visakumo or Brokeliand is the most dangerous. A small Valorn, such as remains in Liathavan, Hakinia, Theranin, Skuld, and presumably Sarangrave, should not be underestimated, however. They will all do their best to slaughter everyone nearby and reclaim their territory once they are roused. Actually doing it. There are only 2 Valorn hearts not currently linked to the Weave of Trods, Biantal Dol in Sarangrave and Kavan in Visakumo. To connect Biantal Dol, the Dance of Navarre and Thorn would need to be performed in Bendol to create Trods in Sarangrave. It would need to be cast twice in Axos, once in a spring regio in the territory of Kabanja, and then from a regio in the ancient Valorn forest of Visakuma. 3 rituals, and all the Valorn hearts will be connected for the first time ever. The Druj are masters of spring magic, and they are no slouches when it comes to the magic of winter. It's not clear what they know about the Valorn, but there's plenty of evidence that over the years their Gulai have made their own study of the Valorn of Biantal Dol. They have been able to contain it in some way, after all, without the extreme step of cursing the whole of Sarangrave the way the Thule did. Several scholars point out that it is surely no coincidence that the Palace of the Sleepers, believed to be a Druj college of magic, is found in Sarangrave, not that far from Biantal Dol. It's very unlikely that they would be blind to the creation of Trods in Sarangrave. They would certainly know what they meant, and they are quite capable of destroying them with their own magic. There's also the challenge of actually getting to Bendol, and doing so would likely to be fruitless if the Druj were still in the territory and capable of tearing the Trods down again. So the first step is likely to be the liberation of Sarangrave. The Aksu mostly ignore the Valorn in Visakuma, but when Aelian Sweetwater visited, it was clear that they were not interested in anything that might rouse it. They are unlikely to cooperate with the Empire in this regard, once it becomes clear to them what linking the Valorn might mean. There is, however, an opportunity here. Very recently, the Navarre became aware of a group of heirs to Kavan, who consider themselves descendants of Turunial ancestors, the same as the Navarre. They apparently survived the fall of the city in Kabanja, as slaves of the citadel known as the Tunnels of Caban. By all accounts, they were received warmly and returned to Cabanja as friends and allies of the Navarre. If they were equipped with suitable amounts of mana and other support, they could be persuaded to perform the dance of Navarre and Thorn, or even provide opportunities for their Navarre cousins to do it themselves, without the permission of the Grand Ilarks. Obviously, this would be a politically complex move. Our friends in the north. The Thule have shared a lot of information about their own understanding of the Valorn. In one way, it's somewhat limited, because from their perspective, the only Valorn that counts is the one in Skuld. On the other hand, even if you question whether the dragons are as old as they claim to be, the Orcs of Otkadov have records that reach back at least as far as the height of Taruniel. In return for sharing their information and speeding the process of the investigation, all they asked was to be privy to the findings of the Great Library. There is some trepidation that the Orcs of Otkadov might be reticent about the steps needed to destroy the Valorn, but the opposite is true. The dragons make it clear that if the Empire wishes to go ahead with the ascension of the Valorn, they will deal with Skuld themselves. They are confident their armies would be a match for it, especially given its relative weakness. They've sacrificed 1,000 years of prosperity in Skuld to keep it weak, after all. Speculation suggests that what the Thule are really excited about is twofold. With the Valorn gone, they would no longer need to keep Skuld under a shroud of winter magic, and could restore it to full fertility. With the Valorn heart exposed and weakened, they could finally get at the treasures of Emrys, arguably the most magically advanced city of the Taruniel Empire. The Thule scholars confirm the first and refuse to be drawn on the second. Regardless, rather than oppose the unification of the Valorn, the Thule are enthusiastically in favour of it. The last battle. One other matter concerns some of the scholars. It arises from study of some of the documents provided by Otkadov, and from some chilly observations by the visiting Thule scholars. Once the process begins, it will prove extremely difficult to stop. Once all the Valorn hearts are joined and the entire Valorn is roused to life, it's not clear how quickly severing the Trods might reverse the situation. It would stop at some point, certainly, but the gathered Vates, the scattering of Urizen arcane scholars, and the emissaries of Otkadov all agree that it would take some years to become quiescent again. Nobody should expect the process to halt immediately. As one magician explained it, the Valorn will be roused to full life because it is threatened, thus it will know that either we or it must triumph. We must assume that it will fight until it is defeated, and it will be on us to make sure that defeat is final. It's never been understood before, but it's clear from scrolls and a skein of years that this climactic final battle with the Valorn is exactly what Navarre and Thorn originally envisaged. Of course, they had no possible way of mounting such an attack at the time, with the armies of the Taruniel all but destroyed. However, they were certain that their descendants would only be in a position to connect all the hearts with Trods at the point where they had built a civilization strong enough to deal with the Valorn once and for all. Before they sacrificed themselves, they made it clear to those who remained behind that there were two sacred duties. The first was to walk the Trods to weaken the Valorn, but the second was to rebuild civilization so that when the time came for the ultimate battle with the Valorn, they would be ready to defeat it. Where do we go from here? The Empire now possesses every scrap of knowledge that it is possible to have about the Valorn. There are no more ancient records, no more lost repositories of secret information. There is nothing more that can be learned about the Valorn now, not until the final battle begins. The only thing that remains now is to decide what to do about it. The Mystery of Beantal Dol. The Saran Grave is crucial to any attempt to rouse the enemy, but relatively little is known about the state of the Valorn here. The territory has never been imperial. It may be that the Druge claimed the lands here when Taruniel fell. What has happened to the Valorn in the 1,000 years since then? There is a spy network in Sarengrave. It is primarily focused around keeping tabs on the Druge and the subject septs in the territories. It might provide an avenue through which to undertake a deeper exploration of Bendol and perhaps even an infiltration of Biantal Dol. Such an incursion would not reap the kinds of dividends seen in the Brokeliand adventure. That required the aid of Rhiannos, regent of the Eternal Sea. However, it would give more insight into how the Orcs of the Malum have contained the Valorn there, and if there are any additional risks in tying it into the network. It's a matter of focus. At present, the network is set up to report on the Druge forces in the territory. It would need some investment to support an expedition into Biantal Dol, but the Imperial Spymaster could arrange that. If they secured 6 wains of weirwood, that would be enough to provision an outpost on the eaves of the Valorn Heart for a season. If the Spymaster hands in 6 wains of weirwood at the end of the event, then we will assume they have made the relevant arrangements, unless they email us otherwise. In that case, a new scouting opportunity will become available for 1 season, allowing military units to scout the Valorn Heart in Sarengrave. It won't last more than a season. The Valorn will quickly consume it. The Spymaster will need to make sure they move quickly to secure any information it can provide. It will need the full 1,500 strength to learn anything useful about the Valorn, and military units assigned to explore Biandol won't contribute to the main Sarengrave spy network. Allies of Convenience. There are several Eternals who have in the past expressed an interest in ending the Valorn. Their aid has been limited, however, by the lack of a clear plan beyond walk and expand the Trods. With the findings of the Great Library at Hakinian, the potential for something more concrete now exists. The Imperial Conclave could lead the way in speaking with these Eternals on the matter of the Hakinian plan. Obvious examples include Ossagran, who has recently spoken of the need to end the Valorn and has been given amity by the Conclave. Sadogua, who is currently in a massive strop but has promised in the past to offer aid to the Navarre to work any magic aimed at destroying the Valorn. Kayla, who has an avowed interest in ending things that have run their course. Surut, who has offered several boons related to destroying both Valorns and forests and seems to personally dislike trees. And Lofir, although the latter Eternal is under enmity and whose recent comments suggest it will not offer any assistance to Imperial magicians without a terrible price being paid. It is early days yet, but securing at least interest from these Eternals might contribute to a discussion of the Hakinian Gambit. A guide to show the way. Knowing what can be done is very different to actually doing it. Knowing it could be done is not the same as saying it should be done. All eyes turn to the Navarre Assembly for guidance, and to the Highborn Assembly also. The Navarre have borne the burden of fighting the Valorn for millennia, and now they are accompanied on their great march by the Grey Pilgrims. The Synod has avowed that the Valorn is the greatest threat to Imperial souls, even greater than the Druge. But did it mean it? The General Assembly has discussed this matter ad nauseam. Will they now urge action? Will the Synod follow through and urge the Empire to finally destroy the Valorn? Or will it judge the risk too great and hesitate? Slow and steady climbs the hill, but when has climbing a hill been an ambitious undertaking? In the wake of the Great Library of Hakinian publishing its findings, any statement of principle in the Navarre or Highborn Assembly that concerns the results of the library's research that receives a greater majority will be examined carefully by priests and lay pilgrims all over the Empire. If the statement results in a mandate in either assembly, then any priest will be able to present an alternative mandate addressed to their own people for their own assembly to consider. The end of the world of the end. There is one other consideration, one that concerns the scholars gathered at Hakinian less than it concerns the philosophers. What happens to the Navarre once the Valorn is gone? For 1,000 years the descendants of the Taruniel have been fighting the Valorn. What does the nation do when it is gone? What are they for without the Valorn to fight? For that matter, what do they do once the Trods are gone? What do the Stridings do when there is no longer an imperative for them to walk the Trods? What about the Steadings when there is no Valorn threat to hold back? The questions are no easier if the Empire demurs. Defeating the Valorn has been the guiding purpose of the Navarre since the nation was born hundreds of years before there even was an empire. What does it mean for people who are oath-sworn to defeat this enemy if, at the last, they turn their face away? What does the nation do if they balk at this challenge? Knowing that you can do something is not the same as knowing whether you should do something, after all. Now the Navarre know how to destroy the Valorn once, they cannot unknow it. It is a choice either way, to complete the Trod network or to leave it undone for future generations. The two choices are not equally momentous, but they are perhaps both equally existential.